Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Please like, comment, and subscribe as we bring you the best conversation in college football, discussion, debate, and analysis to prepare you for the 2018 season. We're in the midst of schedule rankings. I just uploaded Oregon State at 33 and not too bright of a future, at least temporarily, in the interim for Jonathan Smith and company. Team previews and predictions coming your way after that scheduling series is complete. And, of course, team reports as well from the likes of Steve Dace from Michigan Podcast. Steve joins us today to discuss his college football preview that he will let us know where to find. And season projections in terms of wins and losses in regards to the variation between 2017 and 2018 and those outliers that may prove to be much better or much worse, Steve. And let's discuss that. We appreciate you jumping on board, as always.
Hey, Mark. Good to see you, brother. How are you?
Definitely. Doing well. And let's see, we're just about 3+ weeks away. So it's coming soon. And it's Purdue Northwestern on that Thursday night has me a little bit fired up.
It's a big game. And I think a lot is riding on that game for both teams. And I thought it was interesting that Northwestern isn't sure if Clayton Thorson's going to be ready. Not cleared to practice yet, but they brought him to Big Ten Media Days anyway. And I think with Northwestern in that offense, it probably matters not just if he's cleared, but can he go full bore. If the quarterback, we've seen this over the years with Pat Fitzgerald's offense, quarterback isn't a running threat. That offense struggles to move the ball across the street. So I think Northwestern's defensive front seven is legit. I think offensively they got a lot of holes to fill. And that first game on the road against Jeff Brom, whose program took a giant leap in year one, if your star quarterback isn't ready to go and you lose that game, and that's a divisional game, week one, that kind of counts as double. So that's a huge game.
The Big Ten breaking from tradition a bit in scheduling a conference game, and a very meaningful one in week one, and albeit also on a Thursday night. Steve Dace, Michigan Podcast, joining us, and hopefully we can track Steve down in the coming weeks to give us some news from camp and his outlook on the Wolverines. We're looking at the national perspective today. So, Steve, in a recent live stream, I threw out to the audience basically what teams would improve greatly this year or decline greatly. And my estimation at that point, or the number that I came up with, and it was based on me doing my own research and preparation for my own previews and predictions in a few weeks, was my general thought that college football is so cut and dry right now. We know what we expect in the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC. And to the much extent of the Pac-12 and the Big 12 as well. And I hope the chalk doesn't fully take hold as it's expected to. So then I thought, okay, how many of these teams, my predictions are looking very much like 2017. How many of these teams change by about 2 or 3 games per season in regards to wins? And I was surprised, as I texted you, to find 23 teams between 2016 and 2017 that either improved by at least 3 games in the win column or decreased by that much of a value. I know that you've looked at a similar statistic. You went by 2+ or minus win total. And so let's start right there in regards to those teams that you see taking off a bit this year compared to 2017, and then some that may drop off.
Well, if you don't mind, before we do that, I'm
Sure.
going to set a broader stage for a second, because I think a lot of fans make the mistake of, well, that's what they did last year. And I go back to Bill Parcells, and he used to say this about the NFL, where a lot of your roster is the same. And you'll have 70% of the same roster 3 years from now in the NFL that you have right now. Okay. So even Bill Parcells, you say about the pro game, Mark, that it's a different team every single year. And when you look at last season, neither Auburn or Georgia were in the preseason top 10. They were both in my preseason top 10, by the way, last year, which is a projection of how I think the regular season will finish. But neither one of them were in either the AP or the coaches' top 10 last year. And they essentially played in the national quarterfinals, otherwise known as the SEC championship game. And the winner of that game would have gone to the college football playoff. And, these stories happen every single year. I've been following a lot this offseason, of course, with my favorite team, Michigan. And, I can come up with real good reasons why Michigan won't beat Ohio State and Michigan State again. Both are really good teams, so it's not that hard. But often the reasoning I get is, well, they haven't done it yet. That's dumbass reason, frankly. I mean, if your reasoning is a guy who was literally 6 centimeters from winning a Super Bowl it's just going to keep losing forever to Ohio State and Michigan State because that's what you saw last year, that's really a dumbass reason. I mean, there's several other good reasons to make that prediction, right? And Ohio State, at least for maybe the next couple of weeks anyway, they have a Hall of Fame coach. Michigan State is a Hall of Fame coach. Those programs are operating at a really high level, right? There's a lot of other good reasons you can come up with, but often as fans, we just go with what we just saw. And I could do this for, several years. I think over the last 10 years, on average, 3 teams in the AP preseason top 10 don't even finish the year ranked. Well, I went and just looked at last year, and I didn't go any further than the top 10 because those are the teams that are really, you should know the most about, right? If they're in your top 10, that means you I would assume you are the most certain about them and you have the majority of knowledge about them. Just last year, on average, the preseason coaches poll was off by 7 slots per team from where they were in the preseason to where they finished the regular season. I don't really look at the bowl rankings because really once you get past the final 4 games, if you really believe Auburn was as up for that Peach Bowl, there's a reason why the group of 5 team always covers the spread in that game in the New Year's 6 because they're always playing a team that's disappointed to be there from the Power 5. So that's Houston beating Florida State a couple of years ago. That's Central Florida beating Auburn. So I really don't care where you finished in January because bowl games now, especially now we're entering an era where we have so many interim coaches and guys are sitting out for the NFL draft. Who knows what your motivation factor is for the Alamo Bowl compared to what it was 10 years ago. So I'm more interested in where you finish the regular season, where you're pretty much getting everybody's best shot every single week. So from the preseason coaches poll last August to where those teams finished in the final college football playoff rankings, on average, the coaches poll was off by 7 spots per team, not in the top 25, in the top 10. Again, the teams the best. The teams several finished unranked. Now, everybody got Michigan and Florida State wrong last year, all right? But, they had Oklahoma State, number 10. In the AP poll, they finished number 19. And, the idea is the writers, they're not, they follow these games more, and they're not the coaches who farm this out to their SIDs. Well, I kind of bought into that. So I looked at the preseason AP poll last year, Mark. On average, the preseason top 10 of the AP poll was off by about 6 spots per team from where they finished the regular season. And a lot of this is because it's why Phil Steele can put out in January his predictions of what the AP top 10 will be, and he gets 8 of them right every single year. It's the old Beano Cook line. We know what the preseason top 10 is every year. It's what Gary Danielson did last year for CBS Sports preseason broadcasting meetings, where he went up to a whiteboard and he put the preseason top 20 from 1977. But he didn't tell him it was 1977, Mark. He said, hey, this is where I think the best teams will be. Everyone's like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Well, it's the preseason top 20 from 1977, Mark, and it looked a lot like what it looks like now. So, we know who the good teams are. That's true. But in today's era, it's a hell of a difference between going 8-4 and 10-2, between going 9-3 and 8-4. That could be 5 or 6 or 7 slots. So that's why I think, I wouldn't get too married to what these rankings say right now. And instead, I think you're doing it the right way. I'd be looking at who do I think is going to exceed their win total. And so every year in my college football preview, and I just tweeted out the link to it, and so people can go to my Twitter feed at Michigan Podcast, and you'll see it there. But every year in my preview, one of the pieces of information I put in there are teams that I expect to either go down +2 in wins from the or -2 in wins from the year before. Again, that's just through the regular season, and then +2 in wins from the year before. So in alphabetical order, these are the teams that I think will at least be -2 in wins from last year. Arizona State, Army, Central Florida, Central Michigan, Northwestern, who I think will have the biggest win drop, single season win drop in the Big Ten this year. Oklahoma State, South Florida, TCU, Toledo, USC, Virginia Tech, and Washington State. Now, I still think several of those teams will be very good. I just don't see USC winning 10 games given their losses. They have to play early in the year, and they're essentially going to start a high school senior at quarterback. I still think, for example, TCU with Gary Patterson will be pretty good. They have the highest rated recruit they've had ever, Sean Robinson, taking over at quarterback, but I don't see them winning 11 games again. All right. And then these are the teams that I think will go up by at least 2 games in 2018 based on their schedule's talent. And just so fans know, I've been doing this since 1988 when I was in 10th grade. And I usually get about 75% of these teams right on both of these lists. That's usually my bare minimum. So here are the teams I think will win at least 2 more games. Again, in alphabetical order: Baylor, BYU, Georgia Tech, Florida, Florida State, Maryland, Michigan, Nebraska, Pittsburgh, and Texas. I think those teams will win at least 2 more games in the regular season than they did a year ago.
I'm looking at the list right now, what you messaged me. All right. And then you could probably put a narrative of like a 1-line tagline on each of the positive side or the negative side as a reason why. So as I go through it, I see Arizona State. So I guess we're going with a negative first. Arizona State, Herm Edwards, instability in coaching transition. The roster talent isn't that good, which is an anomaly because you think quarterback first, and then they've got a decent one coming back in Manny Williams. They have Manny Wilkins. They have their best player, N'Keal Harry, coming back, but an unproven coach, very much of a wild card at coach. At Army, 10 wins, and it must have been regular season 9, correct? 9-3 for Army. Is a bit of an aberration in regards to what that program has been. Central Florida,
who was that guy at Navy? Who am I thinking of?
Keenan Reynolds.
Keenan Reynolds. They had their Keenan Reynolds last year at Bradshaw, and he's gone. So
Central Florida, with some of these, it's math. It's the probabilities of math.
Yep.
And Central Florida 12.
That's why I get 75% at least of these right every year. That's right. Yes.
Yeah, 10-2 for Central Florida would be another outstanding season.
Sure.
Central Michigan, I gotta admit, I know little about in regards to what they've got coming back.
Way overachieved last year, so you're looking at regression to the mean. Again, math with them. Yep.
Michigan, Northwestern, you're looking at a schedule. I am looking at a schedule. The schedule is what I rank one of the 15 most difficult schedules in America.
Agreed. And again, you don't know you have an uncertain quarterback. And I go back, Justin Jackson was 190 pounds soaking wet. And Mark, they freaking ran him like he was Ron Dane. They ran him into the ground. If they had someone else that could have alleviated the pressure, I think we would have seen that the last 4 years. So I expect a drop off at that position. And then you have the uncertainty of the quarterback. And if you know one thing about the spread offense, if the quarterback can't run, it's a very easy offense to defend. If the quarterback can run, it's a very difficult offense to defend. Clayton Thorson was already on the edge of mobility anyways. That's why he's considered more of an NFL type of a prospect. Now you're telling me he's coming back from a serious knee injury and he's still not cleared to practice. And you look at the schedule. You mentioned the schedule, and a lot of those games are early. Okay. In fact, I'm taking my kid to Chicago. My son and I were going to the Northwestern Michigan game on the 29th. And if you know anything about that series, that's going to be a Michigan home game. I mean, we'll be half of that stadium. So a lot of their most important games are very early in the year when you still aren't sure where Clayton Thorson is at health-wise.
I believe Michigan State on the schedule, Notre Dame and Duke out of conference. They scheduled, which Northwestern typically doesn't schedule that difficult out of conference, but they did this season. Oklahoma State, quarterback uncertainty. Drew Brown has a level of experience at a group of 5 school in Hawaii, but they're still sorting things out there. And again,
he wasn't great there. His numbers are okay. No. So an okay group of 5 quarterback, which is what we saw at Nebraska last year, right? They brought in this okay group of 5 quarterback, and he got the coach fired. So it's him or a completely inexperienced quarterback.
So Oklahoma State, I think you're teetering on a miss there. I don't know which way to make a call there because they at least have to drop to. They were They were 9-3, correct?
Yep.
So we're looking at least 7-5 for Oklahoma
Yep.
State.
I
They
think
do
they're
play
losing
Boise
a
State
game
out of
early in
conference.
the year against Boise State at home.
Mhm.
That's where I think, and then you get to the round robin of the Big 12, and if I'm right and they lose that game, even if they go 5-4 in the Big 12, that's 7-5.
Steve, I'm surprised to see
They just went
TCU.
6-6 a few years ago. So they have. Everybody likes to talk about they've won 10 games 3 of the last 4 years at Oklahoma State. That is true. That what did the record was that fourth year was 6-6. So
I'm surprised to see TCU on this list, dropping to 7-5.
I thought TCU was 10-3 last year. Or
Okay, so they
last year weren't they 11-3?
Right. So they lost the Big 12 championship game. They won the bowl game, so they must have been 11-3.
Yeah, they were 11-3. Yes.
So they were
10-2. I thought last year.
10-2. Okay, 10-2. All right. So 8-4. We'll get it done. All right. Toledo, I can't say I know a whole lot about the Rockets. Obviously, Logan Woodside, and they lost offensive personnel. I know besides him.
They were 10-2, so they would have to go 8-4 or worse.
Okay, the USC schedule, JT Daniels taking a long time to get into play. I think we could see a Sam Darnold 2016 type of deal, 1-3 start, then they win the Rose Bowl. They're a different team at the end of the season, but very difficult schedule is typically the case with USC, Texas, Notre Dame on the schedule. Virginia Tech and Washington State. I'm buying into Washington State despite the 3 layups out of conference. I'm very
Which every year, even when they're good, they always lose one of those.
They do.
Even when they're good.
Like Portland State, Eastern Washington, one of those teams beat them. And I'm very disappointed and really get after Washington State, traditionally Baylor, Oregon this year with the scheduling issues and not playing anyone. All right, let's get to the high risers here.
The last 2 teams there.
Yep.
Virginia Tech probably had the worst offseason in college other than what Ohio State is enduring right now. When you take a look at losing an assistant coach for a Hugh Freeze Act, the academic ineligibilities and injuries they've had, they were already going to be a pretty young team. Their defense has really been gutted, not just now by the draft, where they lost their big 3 players, the Edmonds brothers and Tim Settle, but then a lot of guys like Adonis Jordan and others who are being groomed to sort of be that next level of defensive pieces for them. They've lost several of those guys. And I just, I don't think they recruit at a level to replace that level of talent. And they have a very difficult opener as well at Florida State with a lot of young guys. With Washington State, it's the quarterback situation there. They're bringing in a guy from East Carolina because the tragedy with Tyler Hilinski and his suicide. You had Mike Leach openly trying to get out of there for the Tennessee job last year. So that's why those 2 teams are on this list, because I don't see that. I mean, they're more developmental programs, and I don't believe they've got the ability to just quickly reload like that.
So for Washington State, if they're able to go unscathed through that easy non-conference schedule, then 4-5 still gets it done for your prediction. 7-5 overall, 4-5. I could see that in the Pac-12. All right. So these are the teams that are going to take a step up, or technically 2 steps up. So these are teams that are improving by at least 2 wins in the regular season. Baylor coming off 3-9. I can see that. Freshman quarterback performed extremely well last season. I just did a preview with them. I didn't release it, but I just went through their personnel. I can see that going to 5-7.
All right, I think take one of these one by one to give the audience a little. Okay. With Baylor, first of all, when Vegas put their over/under at 6 and Boston College at 5.5, I did a double take. All right, because that seems like it's way wrong, right? I mean, Boston College has almost every key player from the second half team they were last year coming back, and Vegas doesn't have them as an over/under with a bowl eligibility. And here's Baylor, who was a real doormat last year, but under the surface, you mentioned the freshman quarterback Charlie Brewer got thrust into action. He's kind of a Texas high school legend, and really is just a gamer kind of player. Really came on for them. They've got about a half dozen guys that are major Power 5 transfers, like Jalen Hurd. Our audience remember him, the power back with speed at Tennessee. He's coming in, switching to receiver. So they got about a half dozen big-time Power 5 transfers that I think will buoy them quite a bit. And so that's why I think they're poised to take a big leap. I don't know that I think they'll get to bowl eligibility, but I think they'll get close.
All right, so that's Baylor, and they have the one difficult non-conference game. It is at home, so don't be shocked if Baylor is able to upset Duke at home. They lost by 2 touchdowns in Durham last year. We've got BYU, a disastrous season for them at 3-9 last season, and that's a complete aberration from their history, usually winning between 7 and 9 games.
And that's exactly why this one, yeah, everything that went wrong, Ty Detmer getting fired at OC, Tanner Mangum wasn't ready to come right in and be the starting quarterback for Taysom Hill. Then he got hurt. Everything that could have gone wrong for them went wrong. This is a tradition-rich program. I think you're going to see regression to the mean is not always negative. I mean, it works the other way as well. And as you said, I mean, their history is their floor is usually 7 wins, and they were well beneath that last year. They also don't have an opener like LSU like they did a year ago. So I think that they'll bounce back. I don't know what their ceiling is, but I think their floor is certainly better than 3-9.
So BYU, and I mentioned this in my schedule rankings, which I've got them rated 55th, the most difficult schedule in America. It's always the strangest schedule in America. It's always the top end and the bottom end because they're scrambling for games after everyone goes into their silos and mostly plays conference games after September. So it's a September of Pac-12 football typically for BYU, where they play Arizona, they've got California, they play Wisconsin again. They get them in Madison, have to travel out there this year after getting bludgeoned at home against the Badgers last season. So Washington 2 weeks later, they play the very elite of college football, Wisconsin, Washington. They've got Boise State. They've got Utah late in the season and the Holy War to conclude the season. So you have 2 of the very top 5 to 10 programs in the nation right now. You've got about 4 to 5 top 25 to 30 teams. And then you've got McNeese State, you've got Hawaii, you've got UMass, you've got New Mexico State on the schedule. It's just a very odd schedule that they always are forced to put together because of their independent status that's unlike Notre Dame's that can get their way in scheduling. All right, let me see. I lost track of your list here. Here we go. We've got Georgia Tech, and of course, they missed a game last year. They finished at 5-6 in missing the Central Florida game.
When you look at Georgia Tech, all of their metrics from a year ago looks more like an 9-win team. When you look at yards per play, all the things you start looking at for analytics, this is a team whose record does not line up with what they were able to put on the field. You're right; they had the quirky year with the canceled game and everything else. I just, when I see that, it's similar to some of the trends Phil Steele has pioneered over the years. The turnovers equals turnaround. You know what Phil has looked at with teams that have 3 or 4 close wins a year in 1 year, and how often 70 to 80% of the time the next year. Their win totals are the same or worse, because when you are achieving, and those are the sorts of numbers, yards per play, things of that nature, that a lot of your professional handicappers look at. I think with Taquan Marshall, I think Paul Johnson is one of the best engineers of that triple option offense he's had his entire career there. And if you follow Paul Johnson's career there, when they're down 1 year, they tend to bounce back really well the next. And so I think you will see that for for Georgia Tech this year.
Yeah, to Steve's point, what we've seen from Paul Johnson's team just in the last few years has been 2014 playing Florida State well in the ACC championship game, winning the Orange Bowl, finishing in the top 10 in the nation at 11-3, going 11-3 to 3-9, going to 9-4 after defeating Kentucky in a bowl game, going from 9-4 to 5-6.
You know what? Georgia Tech almost reminds me of the Detroit Lions of my teenage years with back when the NFL still had the imbalanced schedule and you had the 5th place schedule, right? And the Lions would go from worst to first every other year in the old NFC Central, depending on if they with Wayne Fontes, depending if they got the 5th place schedule or not. That's kind of what you're looking at with Georgia Tech. It's almost like the ACC after they have a crappy year, puts them on the 5th place schedule and they bounce back. And what's so weird about that too is their style of offense and stability in their program. I mean, this has been one of the most stable programs in the Power Five for more than a decade now. I mean, they do the same thing every single year. And so that's just their thing. They are a quirky program. They're up, they're down, they're down, they're up. Last year, this year they'll be back up.
Aside from that one Orange Bowl season, though, when I was ranking the coaches in the various Power Five conferences and I looked at Paul Johnson's stay in Atlanta, I do see a slight downward trajectory. I believe his program was ranked 5 out of 6, 6 out of 7 years at the conclusion of those seasons when he started at Georgia Tech. And now he's not quite hitting that mark in recent years. I'm looking at their schedule, Steve, and this always comes to mind for me. This is always what I look at in terms of the conference scheduling. Obviously, in the ACC and the SEC, you miss 5 opponents. You've got an 8-game schedule. You've got 13 possible opponents in the league. So who do you play or not play in the other division? And poor Georgia Tech, they get stuck with Clemson every year. And so they have to play Clemson, and they have Louisville as well, a game on the road to take on the Cardinals. So they get 2 pretty tough matchups in the other division, and they have a second difficult non-conference game. Most teams don't have to deal with that. Fortunately, teams are scheduling better in recent years. I've seen a huge upsurge in number of Power 5 games going to 2 for a number of clubs out there. And for Georgia Tech, it's not a second Power 5 game, but in addition to Georgia, they've got to deal with South Florida on the road in week 2. So it's a pretty difficult schedule.
Agreed, but I think they will beat South Florida in week 2. They had several close calls last year, Tennessee, Miami. So just as we mentioned, that Phil Steele trend that goes back about 20 some odd years, teams that have 3 or 4 close wins tend to have the same or worst record anywhere from 70 to 80% of the time. Well, the reverse is also true. Teams that have 3 or 4 of those types of losses tend to have the same or better record 70 to 80% of the time the next year as well.
Yeah, they put something like 500 rushing yards on the board against Tennessee and fumbled the ball away and blew a big lead late in the game. And yes, the Miami game was a tipped pass on a 4th down that did them in on the final drive. Okay, we've got Florida coming off 4-7. You don't have to sell me on that one.
I just think with the overall personnel there, if they can, Dan Mullen can find a quarterback or get Felipe Franks to, maybe, basic motor function status. They just got to get to bowl eligibility. And I think that's not a big ask for the overall talent base there at the University of Florida.
I don't know what the major platforms say about schedules. I haven't looked at their power rankings. I'm going by the Mark Rogers TV power rankings of schedules, and Florida State has the toughest schedule in the country.
What I like, though, when I look at them, one of the things that is a big metric that you'll see for your audience when you look at my preview is I came up with an analytic last year trying to move beyond returning starters, because I just don't think that matters as much anymore, particularly for the top line programs. The amount of that are really recruiting 3-year players now, anticipating guys are leaving so soon for the NFL. We also don't see mass redshirting of players like we did in the 80s and the 90s and the early 2000s anymore. It's the old Jim Harbaugh line. The only way to get better at football is to play football, So unless the guy's just physically can't go out there without and being a threat to himself because he's just physically can't match up yet, you're seeing a lot of guys play. And then you take a look at sub-packaging and specialization. We see, that's a constant in the NFL. That's more prevalent now in college football. So what I did 2 years for 2017, and I did this on a provisional basis. I wanted to see how this metric was going to play out during the course of that season. And then if it worked out well, I was going to incorporate it full-time into my preview this year. And it did work out, because it told me Georgia had the second most talented roster in the country, and they were in nobody's preseason top 10. So I put them in my top 10, and they were, 3 seconds from winning the national championship. And what this metric does, it looks at your recruiting rankings and the 247 composite rankings, guys that you've retained over 4 years, how you've developed them. It's a point system for the star recruit, and then you get a bonus point if that guy is clearly, over the course of his career, played above that level. It factors in grad transfers, players that you lose through attrition, et cetera. And And these rankings are really high on Florida State. They still believe Florida State, man, 1 to 85 is the most talented roster in the ACC, slightly above Clemson. Now, that doesn't mean they have the best depth chart, okay? You have to develop those guys. But similar to Florida, pretty much everything that could have gone wrong for Florida State last year did. They were number 3 in both major polls. Everybody had them in the preseason top 5. You lose your star quarterback very first week. You lose your head coach. Everything that could have gone wrong for them last year went wrong. They lost their best player on defense for most of the year too. So I think you will see them have a bounce back year. I think you will see it starting week 1 against Virginia Tech. And a lot of their tough, like Notre Dame, things of that nature, I still think most of those are teams that they have better talent than overall, and they get Clemson at home.
Toughest schedule in the nation, according to me. Still have to work out the quarterback situation, but they have 2 pretty good ones. So it's not that they're void of quarterback play. They do lose a lot on defense, and the talent speaks to being able to replace it athletically, as you state. Now, I say all this against the Seminoles, but I, like you, agree with this projection of them increasing their win total by at least 2. So we get Steve Dace.
Which would mean they have to go at least 8-4. They were 6-6.
Yes. Get Steve Dace on the Line from Michigan podcast. What we're doing here is, in his season preview, he has determined which teams will improve by at least 2 wins over the regular season totals, or decrease by 2 or more wins from 2017 to 2018. A couple more teams to cover ground here. Maryland, DJ Durkin doing a tremendous job on the recruiting path. Ran into myriad of quarterback injuries, played 5 guys throughout the season after a 3-1 start.
Yeah, I mean, they had the worst quarterback situation. It's hard to beat what Michigan went through last year. Michigan had 3 different starting quarterbacks for the first time since 1984 when we went 6-6. Maryland topped it, though. Like, we would come in singing, a Mark Chestnut country song about a bad divorce. That would be our quarterback situation. Maryland would bust out like, Clint Black. It's even more depressing than we thought it was. Okay, so that was Maryland last year. So they got 4 wins with the worst quarterback situation in modern college football history. Again, I think you'll see a regression in the mean there, and I think they can get to 6 wins with what they have bringing back with those guys. Is it Pegram? Is that what I'm thinking of? Kasim Hill.
Tyrell Pegram.
Yeah, I think with those guys back and healthy, I think they can get to 6 wins.
Yeah, they started one of those guys. I think it was Pegram against Texas. They win the opener, and he doesn't even finish that game, and he throws for 200 yards and a couple touchdowns, doesn't finish the game. Then the next kid, I can't remember the second kid's name.
Hill was a big recruit for them.
Yeah. Yes. He finished the 3-1 run, and then he got hurt, and Max Bortenschlager finished most of the season. All right, your beloved Wolverines, who were 8-4 regular season last year.
I think this is the most talented team Michigan's had since at least 2006. Maybe the most talented team Michigan's had since the late 90s. I think you're essentially looking at the 2016 team that put all those guys in the NFL. Now, I don't think you'll get that off of this coming draft class, but the next 2 draft classes will put those kinds of numbers in the NFL. So imagine the 2016 team, but with Shea Patterson instead of Wilton Speight at quarterback. I also think, and this is a familiar theme, and these things do even out after a while. Last year, Michigan played 3 different quarterbacks and had 13 different line combinations because of injuries. That just hasn't happened at Michigan in 40 years, or over 30 years, 84. I think the likelihood of seeing that again is very low. I think it's possible the Michigan defense is as talented as any unit on any team in the United States. And I think you'll see that play itself out over the next 2 NFL drafts. So I think when you look at returning talent, I think if Michigan was coached by any coach other than Jim Harbaugh, and I think a lot of people in the media have just decided that Jim Harbaugh's Donald Trump. And what I mean by that is they've decided his persona grants them permission to not be professionals or objective. And I see this in my day job all the time. Regardless of whether you like Trump or don't, whether you voted for him or not, that still doesn't give a lot of people in the media an excuse to be an ass clown while covering him. And that's what's happening here. I mean, I'll give you just one example. I was listening to an interview Jerry DiNardo at the Big Ten Network did a few weeks ago. And maybe you saw this exchange on my Twitter account, Mark. I don't know. And I was listening to this interview, and DiNardo was talking about Patterson's not a fit, won't work. This isn't going to happen. Michigan's going to struggle on offense again. I'm like, okay. I'm sure Shea Patterson had other options. Like, I'm sure Michigan wasn't the only school that was going to take the guy who was the consensus top high school quarterback in the country 3 years ago and is in everybody's mock first round for the 2019 NFL draft. Like, I'm sure somebody else would have taken him. And I'm sure he probably got some assurances from Jim Harbaugh that he's just not going to run fullback checkdowns like John O'Korn, and he's going to overthrow them like O'Korn did anyway. Sure, they're going to, and oh, by the way, you're right. It's not like Harbaugh ever brought the RPO to the NFL with Colin Kaepernick 6 or 7 years ago, when most people still thought RPO was a railroad that you bought on Monopoly. Didn't know what it meant, right? Because you're right. That's what Colin Kaepernick did. He just stood there in the I formation and did fullback freaking checkdowns with the 49ers, right? In tight formations. So I went to Jerry DiNardo to listen to this interview, and I said, Jerry, do you really believe Shea Patterson came here to run fullback checkdowns? And he tweeted me back and said, Mark, no, I actually think Michigan will be much more in a spread. I'm like, well, then why the hell didn't you say that in the interview? And this has gone on the entire offseason. So I don't really care whether you like Jim Harbaugh or not, because I'm not 12, okay? And I don't really care whether you like Donald Trump or not, because, again, I'm a dude. I'm not a 11-year-old girl. But regardless of what you think of somebody else, his persona, that doesn't give you license to abandon all critical thinking. So I really believe this. Pick any other coach in the whole FBS. If any other coach in the FBS, you know what? I'll go Power 5. Any other coach in the Power 5 was bringing back, who Michigan was bringing back, and adding the quarterback Michigan was adding, this would not even be a debate. Because people have decided, for whatever reason, and some of it's probably his fault, some of it's the media's, it's probably the truth is somewhere in the middle. People have decided, similar to what we see every day, which is why I hear this from liberals and conservatives that don't want to watch any of these cable channels because it's just so nauseating, right? Everything Trump does is great. I mean, Trump could go out there and do this, man, and in a speech, and Fox is going to tell you that's the greatest damn speech we've ever seen. And Trump could discover the cure for cancer, and MSNBC's going to say, man, I can't believe Trump's a racist because he didn't discover it last week, right? Most people can't watch these shows. They're tired of it because they're tired of watching people lose their minds because they've got to show how much they either love or hate Donald Trump, whether he deserves it either way or not. And this is what's happened in college football media with Jim Harbaugh. It's nonsensical. Many of these arguments are easily refuted. I do them all the time. People have just decided, and if your argument is, I just think their schedule is too tough, okay, I don't have an argument with that. But aside from that, any other coach in the Power 5, and I mean anyone, folks think is going to get fired, Ed Orgeron, name a name. Any other person coaching the Power 5 right now with this roster and all the bad breaks they had last year and how those tend to even out the next year and the quarterback we're bringing in, this would not even be a debate.
So much to talk about after Steve's dissertation there. Unfortunately, I am very pressed for time, and this is a great conversation on so many levels. And Steve's got a few more teams to run down that I really need to be quick on. But we had Jerry DiNardo on here just a few weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So he raised the same questions. He didn't necessarily say it won't work, but he said he had his doubts. And not knowing Jim Harbaugh's offensive background, but being a football guy and watching the games and understanding football, it was quick for me to go to the Stanford example versus the San Francisco 49ers offensive model and say, hasn't Jim Harbaugh proven himself to be able to adjust to personnel and be able to run different styles of offense?
I mean, it's like when Andrew Luck was still running the triple option with Toby Gerhart, and everybody for that. You remember those days, Mark?
Yes, of course.
I mean, this is just dumbassery. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, you've had me on here enough to know I love my team. I'm not a homer. I mean, you had me on here after that bowl game. Do you remember that show?
Mm-hmm.
I reamed them. I reamed the whole program after that. But these comments are people have just decided for whatever reason he's overexposed, he's a fraud, I don't like him. I don't care about that. All right. You know what? That's Bieber fever on Twitter. Be an adult. The reality is, if any other Power Five coach had the same exact talent base and was bringing in this quarterback, the idea that Michigan would be better this year would not even be an argument.
Folks, I typically jump on the live chat, try to pull most of the best comments and questions. I don't have time to do that today. I appreciate you guys talking it up on the chat. I see a lot of Urban Meyer discussion there. I'm sure Steve has much to talk about there and has on Twitter and other platforms, but we can't get into that. I will let you know that I have 3 particular live streams about Urban Meyer. So if you have yet to hear from me and some of my guests and contributors, certainly check those out. Steve, we've got 3 more teams that you believe will improve by at least 2 games this season. Nebraska, and you talk about a difficult schedule, but they only won 4 last year.
And that's why. I mean, one of the shows I love to listen to, the national shows, a Nebraska fan called up and described their road schedule as heinous. And laugh out loud. That was so well said. And it is a heinous road schedule for a rebuilding program. Michigan has a heinous road schedule too, but they've had 3 top 10 recruiting classes in the last 4 years. Nebraska's just getting started. So I don't think they'll do much better than 6. But I similar to why UCLA over 5 is one of my best bet win totals this year, because I just don't believe Chip Kelly's not going to be able to find a way to get to 6-6. I think the momentum of bringing Scott Frost there is probably worth an extra win by itself. And that's why I think they'll get to bowl eligibility, and they'll pull an upset on somebody. Like, watch that game at home against Michigan State at the end of the year.
All right. Yes. And that would bring us back to 2015, in which that Michigan State team went to the college football playoff and won, but they had a rough time at Nebraska losing that one. Who else do we have? I lost my list again.
Pittsburgh and Texas.
Pitt. I'm having a difficult time with Pitt. They've got to go to 7-5. And you talk about a difficult non-conference slate. Notre Dame, Penn State, Central Florida.
My metric loves them. My roster metric is looking at all the Letterman and everything they're bringing back and loves them. And I do think they got a lot of momentum off that upset against Miami at the end of last year. They found themselves a quarterback there in rising sophomore Kerry Pickett. We know they'll play some defense because, that's Narduzzi's calling card. So I'm doing this one based off of numbers. My numbers tell me Pittsburgh. So over the years, you've heard Phil Steele say, I disagree with my computer. Right? So my numbers are telling me to go with Pittsburgh. So I'm going to play the numbers.
And the last one would be one that I'm sure most people buy into after a 6-6 regular season, and that's Tom Herman and Texas.
Yeah, my metrics love Texas like they loved Georgia last year. My metrics looked at Georgia with all that talent base and a second-year coach and projected they would take a huge leap in year 2, and they were right. This year, my metrics are saying this about Texas. And again, I sort of disagree with the computer, because last year, you remember, I was really high on Texas, because we've seen Tom Herman in year 1, going back to he was an OC at Iowa State. You heard me keep talking about this last summer. His team's improved by 3 or 4 wins every single place he goes. So I thought we'd see that with all the guys coming back. We saw him improve by 1 game. They went from 5-7 to 6-6. So I was prepared into this offseason to kind of be down on them a little bit, but my metrics are telling me that I was a year too early, that Texas is almost, their numbers are almost identical to what Georgia's were in that metric last year, with Kirby Smart going into year 2.
Steve Deace, Michigan Podcast. So we direct you there, Michigan football fans and college football fans. You got to keep up with the Maize and Blue. And of course, as you can hear right there, Steve keeps up with the entirety of the game, coast to coast, all Power 5 and beyond. So please join him there. We have a great time discussing Michigan and the nation. Steve, we appreciate the time. Great job as always. Would love to have you back to talk Michigan football and anything else that we can dig up, because we are on the doorstep.
I can't wait, man. I need this right now. America, it's like my old friend Dan McCarney, the old Iowa State coach, used to tell me, America comes alive when college football is back.
Absolutely. For a guy that loves this kind of weather, though, that's the only thing I don't like about seeing football season comes. But September's beautiful around here in Connecticut. But then after that, bundle up and get hunkered down for a long, cold winter's stay. But we'll not think about that right now. We'll think about the good stuff, and that being college football in 3.5 weeks. Northwestern, Purdue, the headliner for me on that Thursday night, as Steve mentions, a huge decider. Potentially in the Big Ten Western Division if somebody is to challenge the Wisconsin Badgers. So we want to encourage everyone to like, comment, and subscribe. We will have live streams all week. Team reports from various camps across the nation. I apologize for those that wanted to see Alonzo Oliver, Alonzo 1219 at 4 p.m. We had a miscommunication on that, and we'll catch up with Alonzo later this week. Steve, everybody else, we appreciate the time, and we will see you soon.
Thank you, Mark. Go Blue.